Imagine an unseen enemy, a microscopic specter haunting humanity for millennia. It carved its mark onto pharaohs and peasants, reshaped continents, and brought mighty empires to their knees. This wasn't a mythical beast, but a force far more potent, dictating destinies from ancient Egypt to the modern age. Prepare to uncover smallpox, the silent architect of our world. Our journey begins in the hushed tombs of Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Here, etched not in hieroglyphs, but into the embalmed skin of a pharaoh, Ramses V, lies the unmistakable evidence: small oval lesions. More than 3 millennia ago, this ruler, a living god, bore the scars of smallpox. The Variola virus, indifferent to divinity or power, found its perfect breeding ground as early civilizations rose. Smallpox isn't a hunter-gatherer's disease. It thrives in crowds. As humanity pioneered agriculture along the Nile, Tigris-Euphrates, Indus, and Yellow rivers, we built cities, dense human networks ideal for this relentless pathogen. These early urban centers, while wonders of ingenuity, became hotbeds of infection, where smallpox ceased to be sporadic and embedded itself as a constant biological tax on civilization. Ancient Sanskrit texts in India described a similar pustule-causing disease, attributed to the goddess Chala. In China, around the 4th century, a scholar named Jie Hong noted an astonishing truth: survivors gained lifelong immunity, a seed of knowledge that would take 1,000 years to germinate. By the 2nd century CE, the Roman Empire stood at its zenith, the Pax Romana. A vast network of roads and the Mediterranean, their Mare Nostrum, knit together over 50 million people. It was a logistical marvel and a pathogen's dream. In 165 CE, a co-emperor returned from a victorious campaign against the Parthian Empire. His legions marched through Anatolia, Greece, and Italy, bringing home spoils of war and an unseen stowaway from the siege of Suchia. Smallpox had arrived. The great physician Lycelsus, working in Rome, later described the Antonine Plague: fever, black diarrhea, and a darkening rash of dry pustules. The disease spread like wildfire, devastating Rome, the largest city in the world. Corpses piled up faster than they could be removed. The plague killed an estimated 10 to 15% of the empire's population, up to 2,000 daily in Rome itself. The reigning emperor, a Stoic philosopher, watched his world crumble. The military, Rome's backbone, was decimated. Recruitment became impossible, forcing the emperor to recruit slaves, gladiators, and Germanic mercenaries, profoundly altering the legion's composition and weakening the frontiers. The economy tanked as farmers, miners, and taxpayers died. The emperor even auctioned imperial jewels to keep the state functioning. Psychologically, Roman confidence shattered. Traditional gods seemed powerless, creating a vacuum that new religions like Christianity filled, offering solace and care for the sick. The Antonine Plague didn't destroy Rome, but it wounded it severely, leaving deep, systemic fractures that paved the way for future collapse. With the Western Roman Empire's decline, smallpox found new highways. The Silk Road, a network of paths across Central Asia, became a meticulous advance for the virus, carried in merchant's breath or on fabric. Oasis cities like Samarkand and Bukhara became transfer points, slowly spreading the disease across the continent. Meanwhile, the rise of Islam in the 7th century created a vast caliphate, unifying a huge region through language, religion, and trade. Persian physicians, like one in the 9th century, penned detailed treatises, clearly distinguishing smallpox and noting lifelong immunity, knowledge that would remain a medical reference for centuries. From the heart of the Islamic world, maritime trade routes spread the virus across the Indian Ocean. It was through these networks that smallpox made one of its most devastating leaps, reaching isolated Japan in 735 CE. With no pre-existing immunity, a third of the population perished. The imperial court was decimated, leading to the construction of Buddhist temples and the great Buddha of Nara in a desperate plea for divine intervention. In medieval Europe, smallpox became an endemic childhood disease, a constant, silent killer, claiming 1 in 10 children annually. Its pockmarked legacy became a grim, visible reality, a filter of life. Then came the age of exploration. European ships, swelling with ambition, carried an invisible passenger, Variola Major. For the peoples of the New World, this was not a plague, but an apocalyptic death sentence. In 1518, a ship departing from Santo Domingo for Cuba with an infected enslaved person unleashed the first documented smallpox outbreak in the Caribbean. The disease leaped from island to island, decimating the Taino and Carib populations who utterly lacked immunity. Accounts speak of entire villages falling silent, fields abandoned, mortality rates exceeding 80, even 90%. The inexorable march continued to the mainland. In 1520, the disease jumped to the coast of Veracruz in Mexico, preceding the conquest of the Aztec Empire. A Spanish conqueror had landed in 1519, but his small forces were dwarfed by the millions in the Great Empire. Smallpox swept through Tenochtitlan, the majestic Aztec capital, even before the final siege. Chroniclers described bodies covered in pustules, fevers consuming the strongest. The Aztecs' new ruler, successor to the previously captured emperor, succumbs to smallpox just 80 days after ascending the throne. His death shattered morale and command. The city, already besieged, became a vast hospital and cemetery. Between 25 to 50% of the population died, a victory won not by steel swords, but by an unseen enemy that paved the way for conquest. But smallpox wasn't done. Its invisible steps marched southward along indigenous trade routes, reaching the Inca Empire long before the arrival of a Spanish explorer named Pizarro. The powerful Inca emperor, who had expanded his realm to its greatest extent, was an early victim around 1528. His death triggered a bloody civil war between his warring princes. When Pizarro finally arrived in 1532, he found an empire already fractured, weakened by years of conflict, and populations severely diminished by smallpox. The disease had not only wiped out millions, but had utterly disorganized political and military structures, leaving fertile ground for European conquest. Smallpox became the most formidable, ruthless ally of the Spanish, an unintentional biological weapon that softened the enemy, allowing a handful of men to subjugate vast empires. This macabre dance wasn't confined to distant shores. In Europe, smallpox was a constant, ominous shadow over royalty, rewriting dynastic history with every pustule. No monarch was safe. It was the great leveler, reminding kings of their vulnerability, yet their survival or death profoundly altered kingdoms. Consider England in the late 17th century. The Glorious Revolution had installed a Dutch king and his wife, Queen Mary II, as joint monarchs. In December 1694, the Queen, barely 32, contracted smallpox. Despite the best physicians, she died. Her death was a tremendous political blow, as she represented the dynastic link legitimizing the new regime. Her passing left the king alone, rekindling hopes for the deposed line and introducing instability into the monarchy. Now to 18th century France. The reigning king, great-grandson of the Sun King, had survived smallpox as a child. But his lineage was less fortunate. In 1712, an outbreak swept the royal family, claiming his father, mother, and older brother within weeks. Only the infant king and his younger brother were spared by their governess. Smallpox returned in 1774 to claim the king himself at 64. His pustules grew so grotesque the stench pervaded Versailles, and courtiers fled. His death brought his inexperienced grandson and his wife to the throne, inheriting a kingdom on the brink of revolution. Smallpox had accelerated history, bringing onto the stage actors for one of history's bloodiest dramas. From Russian Tsars to Holy Roman Emperors, the pockmarked crowns of Europe were silent testaments to smallpox's undeniable power to shape the destiny of nations. For centuries, humanity's only response was resignation. But despair breeds audacity. What if you could strike a deal with the monster? This idea, not born in European laboratories but in the bazaars and homes of Asia and Africa, was called variolation. The principle was terrifyingly simple. Pus from a mild smallpox case was introduced into a healthy person, usually through a small skin cut or by insufflating dried scabs into the nose. The goal: induce a controlled, hopefully milder infection, conferring lifelong immunity. It was a gamble. Most times it worked, leaving scars but granting safety. Sometimes the induced case turned lethal, and a newly variolated person was contagious, capable of starting a new epidemic. Yet, in a world where natural smallpox killed 1 in 3, a 1 to 2% risk from variolation was a considerable improvement. In the early 18th century, an English aristocrat, Lady Mary, traveled to Constantinople. Having been disfigured by smallpox herself, she observed with fascination the local practice of inoculation. Driven by fear for her son, she had him variolated in 1718. He recovered. Returning to London, she championed the practice amidst skepticism from a conservative medical establishment. A crude clinical trial was devised. In 1721, 6 condemned prisoners at Newgate Prison were offered a royal pardon if they survived variolation. All 6 accepted. All 6 survived, proving immune to later exposure. With this, and successful trials on orphans, the Princess of Wales allowed her 2 daughters to be variolated, granting it royal seal of approval. Across the Atlantic, in 1721 Boston, a reverend, an erudite scholar named Cotton Mather, witnessed a devastating epidemic. Remembering a conversation with an enslaved man in his household, whom he called Onesimus, about African inoculation practices, and reading Royal Society reports, Mather became a fervent advocate. He convinced a local physician, Dr. Zabdel, to perform the procedure. The reaction was violent. Accusations of playing God, pamphlets, even a grenade thrown at Mather's home. But they persisted, keeping meticulous records. Of 6,000 Bostonians who naturally contracted smallpox, 844 died. Of 287 variolated, only 6 perished. The evidence was overwhelming. Variolation was a dangerous pact. Humanity needed something safer. The answer came not from royal courts, but from a country doctor in late 18th century England, Edward Jenner. In the Green Hills of Gloucester, a land of dairy farms, Jenner repeatedly encountered an old wives' tale. Milkmaids claimed they couldn't get smallpox because they'd already had cowpox. Cowpox, a milder disease, caused painful but non-fatal lesions on cow udders and milkmaids' hands. Dismissed by many, Jenner, an amateur naturalist, saw potential. What if this trivial ailment could protect against deadly smallpox? On May 14, 1796, Jenner took fluid from a fresh cowpox lesion on a milkmaid named Sarah Nelms. He then made 2 shallow incisions on the arm of a healthy 8-year-old, James Phipps, his gardener's son, and rubbed the material into the wounds. James developed a mild fever, a pustule, then recovered. The first part was a success. 6 weeks later, the ultimate test. Jenner deliberately inoculated James with human smallpox material. A day passed, then another. No fever, no rash, nothing. The boy's body, primed by the benign cow virus, had recognized and neutralized its deadlier cousin. The immunity was real. Jenner coined a new term, vaccination, from vacca, the Latin word for cow. A humble, rustic name for a monumental medical advancement. Initially, his findings were met with skepticism, even rejection by the Royal Society. Variolators, whose livelihoods were threatened, attacked it as dangerous. Satirical caricatures depicted vaccinated people growing cow heads. But vaccination's advantages were undeniable, far safer, near zero risk of death, and recipients weren't contagious. The idea spread rapidly, first across Britain, then globally.
Jenner's discovery fit perfectly with the Enlightenment spirit of reason and progress, but a formidable obstacle remained: distance. The fragile cowpox virus couldn't be simply bottled and shipped. It had to be kept alive. The solution was as ingenious as it was macabre: a human chain. Vaccinate one person, and once their pustules matured, use their lymph to vaccinate the next, creating a living relay of immunity. Spain, an empire often seen in decline, undertook the most ambitious public health mission in history, the Royal Philanthropic Vaccine Expedition, led by Dr. Francisco Javier de Balmas. In 1803, King Charles IV, whose own daughter had died of smallpox, dispatched Balmas with a team and 22 orphaned children aged 3 to 9. Isabel Zendel Gomez, the orphanage director, cared for the children who were the living vessels of the medical miracle. From the port of La Coruña, 2 children were vaccinated. On the voyage, as their pustules matured, their lymph was used to vaccinate 2 more, maintaining an unbroken chain across the Atlantic. The expedition reached the Canary Islands, then Puerto Rico and Venezuela. At each port, thousands were vaccinated, and local vaccination boards were established. From Mexico, the mission split. Balmas sailed to the Philippines, and from there to Macau and Canton, introducing Jenner's technique to the Far East. His second-in-command embarked on an epic journey through South America, crossing jungles, deserts, and the Andes for 7 years, bringing the vaccine to what is now Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. He died of exhaustion, a martyr to public health. This expedition was an astonishing triumph, a precursor to global disease eradication. While a humanitarian act, it also served colonial interests, protecting labor and presenting European powers as benevolent modernizers. The 20th century dawned with promises, yet the old ghost of smallpox still walked. It claimed between 300 and 500 million lives in that century alone, more than all 20th century wars combined. In wealthy Western nations, mass vaccination had eliminated it, but it clung fiercely in places like Somalia. On October 26, 1977, in Merka, Somalia, a hospital cook named Ali Maumalan encountered something the world believed was history: the distinctive pustules of smallpox. He was unvaccinated, a chilling anomaly in a near-victorious global eradication campaign. The World Health Organization's smallpox team, operating with military precision, mobilized. Their strategy: ring vaccination. Identify a case, isolate it, then vaccinate all contacts and contacts of contacts, creating concentric waves of protection. Teams crisscrossed Merka, vaccinating an estimated 50,000 people in just 4 weeks. Ali Maumalan survived. His case, instead of igniting a new wave, marked the endpoint. No more natural smallpox cases were found. On May 8, 1980, at the World Health Assembly in Geneva, the WHO made a declaration resonating through history. Smallpox had been eradicated. Not controlled, but completely erased. It was the only human pathogen ever vanquished from Earth by deliberate, coordinated human action. The victory, though sweet, posed a thorny question: what to do with the enemy's last vestiges? Samples of the virus remained frozen in maximum security labs at the CDC in Atlanta, United States, and at the Vector Institute in Koltsovo, near Novosibirsk in the Soviet Union. These were the last 2 cages for a monster that had roamed free for eons. The debate was fierce. Some argued for total destruction. The risks, accidents, breaches, bioterrorism were immense. Why keep it alive? Others defended preservation. Smallpox, they argued, was an invaluable scientific resource for studying related viruses, developing new vaccines, or in case of reemergence. It was genetic memory, a part of life's history. A compromise was reached. Samples would remain in the 2 labs under strict international control, a precarious balance between extreme caution and scientific curiosity that endures today. Smallpox's scars are deeper than just pockmarks on skin. Its eradication redefined global public health, proving that humanity could conquer a disease.
The WHO was forged in this crucible, learning to coordinate massive efforts across borders. Every mass vaccination campaign for polio or measles echoes this foundational victory. Smallpox taught us that a disease-free world is not utopian but achievable. Its selective pressure over centuries likely influenced our very genetic code, shaping immune defenses. This profound legacy of triumph over a millennia-old monster reminds us that vigilance, science, and international cooperation are our only weapons against the microscopic world's lurking shadows.